The grand cathedral fell silent as Eleanor Whitmore raised her gloved hand, her voice cutting through the sacred air like a blade. "Duke, first everyone must know your secret." The groom's face drained of color as 300 of New York's elite turned in their pews, their whispers creating a symphony of scandal. What secret could be so devastating that a bride would halt her own wedding at the altar? The autumn of 1895 painted the Hudson Valley in brilliant crimson and gold, but Eleanor Whitmore saw only the gilded bars of her destiny. From the marble terrace of Whitmore Manor, she gazed across the manicured lawns where peacocks strutted with the same arrogance as the society matrons who frequented her mother's drawing room. "Eleanor, darling, you must stop this melancholy brooding," declared her mother. Constance Whitmore sweeping onto the terrace in a rustle of burgundy silk. "The Duke of Ashford arrives tomorrow, and you look positively wan at 22. Eleanor possessed the refined beauty expected of her station, auburn hair swept into an elaborate Gibson girl style, emerald eyes that sparkled with intelligence her mother deemed unnecessary, and a figure that filled her Worth gowns to perfection. Yet beneath the porcelain facade lay a restless spirit that yearned for something beyond the predetermined path of marriage to English nobility. "Mother, surely there are other considerations beyond his title," Eleanor ventured, her fingers tracing the cold marble balustrade. Constance's laugh tinkled like expensive crystal. "Considerations? My dear child, Duke Sterling Ashford is the catch of the century. His estates span half of Yorkshire, and his bloodline traces back to the Norman conquest. What more could any sensible girl desire?" Eleanor bit back her true thoughts. She desired conversation that extended beyond the weather and fashion. She longed for a partner who saw her mind as valuable as her dowry. But such romantic notions were luxuries the daughter of railroad magnate Theodore Whitmore could not afford. The Duke arrived the following afternoon in a gleaming black carriage bearing his family crest. Sterling Ashford cut an impressive figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of aristocratic features that graced oil paintings in ancestral halls. His dark hair was perfectly groomed, his clothing impeccable, and his manner possessed the easy confidence of a man who had never been denied anything. "Miss Whitmore," he said, bowing over her hand with practiced grace, "your beauty exceeds even your reputation." Eleanor curtsied appropriately, noting how his pale blue eyes seemed to catalogue her worth rather than truly see her. "Your Grace honors me with your presence." Over the following weeks, Sterling courted her with the efficiency of a business transaction. He brought appropriate gifts, hothouse flowers, leather-bound poetry he clearly had never read, and jewelry that spoke more of his wealth than his affection. Their conversations followed predictable patterns: the weather, mutual acquaintances, and his estates in England. "You'll adore Yorkshire," he assured her during one of their chaperoned walks through Central Park. "The countryside is quite civilized, and you'll have an army of servants to manage. A duchess needs little more than to look beautiful and produce heirs." Eleanor's stomach clenched at his casual dismissal of her capabilities, but she smiled demurely. "How fortunate that your expectations align so perfectly with my upbringing." If Sterling detected the subtle irony in her tone, he gave no indication. His attention was already shifting to a group of society ladies who had paused to admire his fine figure. The engagement was announced at a lavish ball in November, with Eleanor wearing the Ashford family sapphires, a heavy necklace that felt more like a collar than an adornment. As Sterling slipped the enormous engagement ring onto her finger, she felt the final lock clicking into place on her golden cage. "To the future Duchess of Ashford," Sterling proclaimed, raising his champagne glass to the assembled crowd. "May she prove as ornamental as she is obedient." The guests laughed appreciatively at what they assumed was charming wit. But Eleanor caught the underlying message. She was to be a beautiful possession, nothing more. As the evening wore on, she noticed how Sterling's eyes lingered on her younger sister Charlotte, how his hand rested possessively on Eleanor's waist, and how he spoke about her as if she weren't present. That night, alone in her bedroom, Eleanor stared at the sapphire ring that caught the moonlight like a beautiful trap. 6 months until the wedding. 6 months until she became the Duchess of Ashford and disappeared entirely into Sterling's shadow. But as she drifted toward sleep, a troubling thought nagged at her consciousness. During the engagement celebration, she had overheard a fragment of conversation between Sterling and his valet something about maintaining appearances and the arrangement in London. What arrangement could require such secrecy? The morning of May 15, 1896, dawned with the kind of perfect spring weather that seemed ordained for fairy tale weddings. St. Patrick's Cathedral stood resplendent in the heart of Manhattan, its Gothic spires reaching toward heaven as if blessing the union about to take place within its hallowed walls. Eleanor sat before her vanity mirror as her lady's maid, Mary, fastened the final pearl buttons on her wedding gown, a masterpiece of ivory silk and Belgian lace that had taken 6 months to create. The dress transformed her into a vision of bridal perfection, yet she felt like an actress preparing for a role she had never auditioned for. "You look like an angel, Miss Eleanor," Mary whispered, adjusting the family tiara that would soon be replaced by a duchess's coronet. Through her bedroom window, Eleanor could see the endless stream of carriages arriving at the cathedral. 300 of New York's most prominent families had gathered to witness her transformation from American heiress to English nobility. The guest list read like a directory of the Gilded Age elite: Astors, Vanderbilts, Whitneys, and Carnegies, all eager to witness this ultimate symbol of American wealth purchasing European prestige. "Eleanor, darling, it's time," her mother announced, sweeping into the room in a gown of deep purple silk that proclaimed her status as mother of the bride. Constance's eyes glistened with tears of triumph. "Today you make history. The first Whitmore to marry into the English peerage." The carriage ride to the cathedral passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. Eleanor's father, Theodore, patted her gloved hand reassuringly. "You're doing the right thing, my dear. Sterling will provide you with a life of luxury and position that few women could dream of." But as they approached the cathedral, Eleanor noticed something odd. A small crowd of working-class women had gathered across the street, their faces bearing expressions of sympathy rather than celebration. One woman, dressed in simple brown wool, caught Eleanor's eye and shook her head sadly before melting back into the crowd. Inside the cathedral, the scene was breathtaking. Thousands of white roses and orange blossoms adorned every surface, their fragrance mingling with the incense to create an almost intoxicating atmosphere. The organ's triumphant notes filled the vast space as Eleanor began her procession down the endless aisle, her silk train whispering against the marble floor. Sterling waited at the altar, resplendent in his mourning coat, his pale eyes fixed on her with what she had learned to recognize as satisfaction rather than love. Beside him stood his best man, Lord Pemberton, whose nervous fidgeting seemed oddly out of place for such a solemn occasion. As Eleanor reached the altar, she noticed her sister Charlotte in the front pew, radiant in rose-colored silk. Charlotte's smile seemed particularly bright, almost triumphant, as she watched Eleanor take her place beside Sterling. The ceremony proceeded with stately grandeur. Archbishop Corrigan's voice resonated through the cathedral as he spoke of the sacred bonds of matrimony, of duty and devotion, of the joining of two souls before God. Eleanor responded to each prompt mechanically, her voice steady despite the growing unease in her chest. "Do you, Sterling Ashford, Duke of Ashford, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part?" Sterling's voice rang out clear and confident. "I do." "And do you, Eleanor Constance Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part?" Eleanor opened her mouth to speak the words that would seal her fate, but something made her pause. In that moment of silence, she caught sight of Charlotte's face, and the expression there was not one of sisterly joy, but of barely concealed glee. Charlotte's eyes met Sterling's for just an instant, and Eleanor saw something pass between them that made her blood run cold. Eleanor began, then stopped. The cathedral fell silent except for the rustle of silk as 300 guests leaned forward in their pews. "Eleanor?" the archbishop prompted gently. But Eleanor's mind was racing, connecting fragments of memory like pieces of a puzzle. Charlotte's frequent visits to Sterling during their engagement, and the way Sterling's eyes followed her sister at social gatherings. The overheard conversation about arrangements and maintaining appearances, the working women outside the cathedral who had looked at her with pity. "Duke," Eleanor said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space, "first everyone must know your secret." A collective gasp rose from the assembled guests. Sterling's face went white, then flushed crimson. "Eleanor, what are you?" "Tell them about your arrangement with my sister," Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Tell them about the letters you've been exchanging. Tell them about your true feelings for Charlotte." Charlotte shot to her feet, her face a mask of panic. "Eleanor, you don't know what you're saying." But Eleanor did know. In that moment of clarity, she understood everything. The engagement had never been about love or even genuine social climbing. It had been about Sterling gaining access to the Whitmore fortune while pursuing the sister he truly desired. Charlotte, younger and more malleable, had been his real target all along. "Shall I tell them myself?" Eleanor asked, turning to face the stunned congregation. "Shall I explain how my fiancé has been conducting a secret correspondence with my own sister? How he planned to marry me for my dowry while keeping Charlotte as his mistress?" The cathedral erupted in shocked murmurs. Theodore Whitmore rose from his seat, his face thunderous. "Sterling, is this true?" Sterling's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand the pressures of maintaining an estate. The debts you planned to pay with my father's money while you dallied with my sister?" Eleanor's voice cut through his excuses like a blade. Charlotte burst into tears, but they seemed more tears of frustration than remorse. "Eleanor, you were never supposed to find out. You would have been happy enough as a duchess." The words hung in the air like a death knell. Eleanor felt a strange sense of liberation as she reached up and removed the Ashford family tiara, placing it carefully on the altar. "I believe this belongs to you, Your Grace," she said with perfect composure, "along with your title, your debts, and your deceptions." As Eleanor turned and walked back down the aisle, her head held high despite the chaos erupting around her, she felt the eyes of 300 guests burning into her back. But for the first time in months, she felt truly free. What would become of her now, a woman who had publicly humiliated one of England's most prominent dukes? Where could she possibly go after such a scandal? The scandal of Eleanor Whitmore's wedding day spread through New York society like wildfire through dry timber. Within hours, the story had been embellished, distorted, and repeated in every drawing room from Fifth Avenue to Washington Square. Some painted Eleanor as a hysterical bride who had suffered a nervous collapse. Others whispered that she had discovered Sterling in a compromising position with Charlotte mere hours before the ceremony. Eleanor cared little for the various versions of her disgrace. She had retreated to her childhood bedroom at Whitmore Manor, where she spent 3 days in self-imposed exile, refusing visitors and surviving on tea and toast brought by the loyal Mary. On the 4th morning, her father knocked softly on her door. Theodore Whitmore entered, looking older than his 58 years, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled from sleepless nights. "Eleanor, my dear," he said, settling heavily into the chair beside her window seat. "We must discuss your future." Eleanor looked up from the book she had been pretending to read. "What future, Papa? I am now the woman who humiliated a duke at the altar. No respectable family will receive me." Theodore's weathered hands clasped and unclasped nervously. "Sterling has returned to England, taking Charlotte with him. They were married by special license 3 days ago." The news should have devastated Eleanor, but instead, she felt only a hollow sense of vindication. "How convenient for them both your mother is. Indisposed," Theodore continued carefully. "The shock has been considerable. She's taken to her bed and refuses to see anyone." Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. Constance Whitmore had built her entire identity around social position and the prospect of having a duchess for a daughter. The collapse of those dreams would naturally require an extended period of dramatic recovery. "However," Theodore said, his voice brightening slightly, "I've received a letter from your Aunt Agatha in Boston. She's invited you to stay with her for as long as you need." Agatha Pemberton was Theodore's younger sister, a woman who had scandalized the family 20 years earlier by refusing 3 perfectly suitable marriage proposals and instead using her inheritance to establish a school for working women. She lived in a brownstone on Beacon Hill, surrounded by books, causes, and what polite society considered dangerously progressive ideas. Aunt Agatha, Eleanor mused, remembering the sharp-witted woman who had always treated her more like an intelligent human being than a decorative object. Mother always said she was a cautionary tale. Perhaps, Theodore smiled for the first time in days. But she's also the happiest person I know. 2 weeks later, Eleanor found herself on a train bound for Boston, carrying only 2 trunks and a heart full of uncertainty. As the locomotive pulled away from Grand Central Station, she watched New York disappear behind a veil of steam and smoke, taking with it everything she had ever known about herself. Aunt Agatha met her at South Station, looking exactly as Eleanor remembered, tall and elegant despite her 50 years, with silver-streaked auburn hair and eyes that sparkled with intelligence and mischief. She wore a practical navy dress that managed to be both fashionable and functional, and her smile was warm enough to melt Eleanor's carefully maintained composure. "My dear girl," Agatha said, embracing her niece firmly, "you look like you've been through a war." "I feel as though I have," Eleanor admitted, surprised by the relief she felt at being held by someone who asked nothing of her except honesty. Agatha's Beacon Hill home was a revelation. Unlike the formal grandeur of Whitmore Manor, every room invited conversation and contemplation. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Comfortable chairs were arranged for reading rather than display, and the overall atmosphere suggested a place where ideas mattered more than appearances. "I've prepared the blue room for you," Agatha said, leading Eleanor up the narrow staircase. "It has excellent morning light and overlooks the common. I thought you might enjoy watching the world wake up each day that first evening." As they sat before the fireplace sharing a simple dinner, Agatha asked the question Eleanor had been dreading. "Do you regret it?" Eleanor considered carefully. "I regret the public nature of it. I regret the pain it caused my father. But stopping the wedding itself? No, I don't regret that." "Good," Agatha said briskly. "Regret is a luxury you can't afford. The question now is what you intend to do with your freedom." "I'm not certain I have any options," Eleanor replied. "No respectable man will have me now." Agatha's laugh was rich and genuine. "My dear child, respectability is vastly overrated. And as for men, the right one will admire your courage, not condemn it. Over the following weeks, Eleanor discovered a Boston far different from the New York society she had known. Agatha introduced her to a circle of remarkable women teachers, writers, reformers, and artists who had carved out meaningful lives on their own terms. There was Dr. Sarah McKinney, one of the first female physicians in Massachusetts, and Miss Julia Ward Howe, the author of the Battle Hymn of the Republic, who still held weekly salons despite being in her 70s. These women, Agatha explained as they walked through the public garden one crisp October morning, have learned that a woman's worth isn't determined by the man she marries, but by the contributions she makes to the world. Eleanor found herself drawn into this community of independent thinkers. She began volunteering at Agatha's school, teaching literature to young women who worked in factories during the day and attended classes in the evening. Their hunger for knowledge and their determination to improve their circumstances inspired her in ways she had never expected. It was at the school that she first encountered Dr. Elias Reed. He had come to give a lecture on public health to the students, and Eleanor was immediately struck by his passionate advocacy for the working poor. Unlike the men of her previous acquaintance, Dr. Reed possessed a quiet intensity that spoke of genuine purpose rather than social ambition. He was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that refused to stay properly combed and brown eyes that seemed to see everything with compassionate clarity. His clothing was well-made but practical, and his manner suggested someone more comfortable in a hospital ward than a drawing room. After his lecture, Eleanor found herself in conversation with him about the health challenges facing the immigrant communities in Boston's North End. "The conditions are appalling," he said, his voice heavy with concern. "Entire families crowded into single rooms, no proper sanitation, children dying of diseases that could as easily be prevented with basic medical care. What can be done?" Eleanor asked, genuinely interested. Dr. Reed looked at her with surprise, as if he hadn't expected such a question from a woman of her obvious social standing. "Education, primarily. Teaching people about hygiene, nutrition, the importance of fresh air and clean water, but it requires someone willing to go into those neighborhoods, to earn the trust of people who have little reason to trust outsiders." As Eleanor walked home that evening, she found herself thinking not about the scandal she had left behind in New York, but about the possibility of a life dedicated to something larger than herself. For the first time since her wedding day, she felt a stirring of genuine excitement about the future. But could a woman with her background truly make a difference in the lives of Boston's poor? And what would Dr. Reed think if he knew the full story of her disgrace? Winter melted into spring in Boston, and with it, Eleanor felt herself blooming in ways she had never imagined possible. Under Agatha's guidance, she had thrown herself into the work at the school with a passion that surprised everyone, including herself. Her natural intelligence, previously channeled only into the accomplishments expected of a society lady, now found purpose in developing curriculum and organizing community outreach programs. Dr. Elias Reed had become a frequent visitor to the school, and Eleanor found herself looking forward to their conversations, with an anticipation that had nothing to do with social obligation and everything to do with genuine intellectual connection. He treated her as an equal, seeking her opinions on matters of public health policy and listening thoughtfully to her suggestions. "Miss Whitmore," he said, one April afternoon as they reviewed plans for a new clinic in the North End, "your insights into community organization are remarkable. Have you considered that your background might actually be an advantage in securing funding from Boston's philanthropic families?" Eleanor looked up from the papers spread across Agatha's dining table where they had been working for the past 2 hours. You mean use my social connections for something meaningful?" "Precisely." Elias smiled, and Eleanor noticed how his entire face transformed when he was enthusiastic about a project. Who better to approach the Cabots and Lowells than someone who speaks their language? It was then that Agatha announced her intention to host a grand charity gala to raise funds for the clinic. "It's time, my dear," she told Eleanor over breakfast one morning. "You've been hiding in Boston long enough. The city's elite need to see what you've become." Eleanor's stomach clenched with familiar anxiety. "Aunt Agatha, I'm not certain I'm ready to face society again." "Nonsense," Agatha replied briskly. "You're not the same woman who fled New York. You have purpose now, conviction. Let them see what their narrow-minded expectations nearly destroyed." The gala was scheduled for the first Saturday in May, exactly 1 year after Eleanor's aborted wedding. As the date approached, Eleanor found herself both terrified and exhilarated. She had commissioned a new gown, not the elaborate confection expected of a debutante, but an elegant creation in deep emerald silk that spoke of confidence rather than submission. The evening of the gala, Eleanor stood before her mirror as Mary, who had followed her to Boston, arranged her hair in a sophisticated chignon that emphasized her graceful neck and the intelligence in her green eyes. You look beautiful, Miss Eleanor, Mary said softly. But more than that, you look strong. The ballroom at the Somerset Club was filled with Boston's most prominent families, their jewels glittering under the crystal chandeliers. Eleanor entered on Agatha's arm, her head held high despite the whispers that followed in her wake. She knew her story had preceded her to Boston, but tonight she was determined to write a new chapter. Dr. Reed was waiting near the entrance, resplendent in formal evening wear that transformed him from the earnest physician she knew into a figure of quiet elegance. When he saw her, his face lit up with genuine admiration. "Miss Whitmore," he said, bowing over her gloved hand, "you look radiant." "Thank you, Dr. Reed," she replied, feeling a warmth spread through her chest at his sincere compliment. "Are you prepared for your presentation about the clinic?" "With your help, I believe we can convince even the most conservative donors of its necessity," he said, offering her his arm. As they moved through the crowd, Eleanor was surprised by the reception she received. While some matrons turned away with disapproving sniffs, many others approached her with genuine curiosity about her work with the immigrant communities. Her reputation as the woman who had humiliated a duke was gradually being replaced by recognition of her charitable efforts. It was then that she saw them. Sterling and Charlotte stood near the refreshment table, both looking every inch the aristocratic couple they had become. Sterling wore his title like armor, his posture radiating the arrogance that had once intimidated Eleanor. Charlotte, now the Duchess of Ashford, was resplendent in sapphire silk and the family diamonds that should have been Eleanor's. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Eleanor felt a moment of the old panic. But then Ilias's steady presence beside her reminded her of how much she had changed, how much she had grown. "Eleanor," Sterling said as they approached, his voice carefully modulated for public consumption. "How? It's unexpected to see you here." "Your Grace," Eleanor replied with perfect composure, executing a flawless curtsy. "Charlotte, I trust you're enjoying your visit to Boston." Charlotte's smile was brittle as winter ice. "We're here on business, actually. Sterling is considering investments in American railroads." "How practical," Eleanor said smoothly. "I'm sure Father would be happy to discuss opportunities with you." The conversation might have continued in this vein of polite hostility, but Dr. Reed stepped forward with the quiet confidence Eleanor had come to admire. "Your Grace," he said, addressing Sterling directly, "I don't believe we've been introduced. Dr. Elias Reed. I've heard much about your estates in Yorkshire." Sterling's pale eyes assessed Elias with the calculating gaze of a man accustomed to measuring others by their wealth and status. "Dr. How... interesting. And what is your connection to Miss Whitmore?" "Dr. Reed and I are collaborating on a medical clinic for Boston's immigrant population," Eleanor said before Elias could respond. "His dedication to public health is truly inspiring." "Public health," Charlotte repeated, her tone suggesting she found the concept distasteful. "How very charitable of you both." "Indeed," Sterling added, his voice dripping with condescension, "though I imagine such work must be quite taxing for someone of your delicate constitution, Eleanor." It was the same dismissive tone he had used throughout their engagement, the assumption that she was merely decorative, incapable of serious thought or meaningful contribution. But this time, instead of accepting his judgment, Eleanor felt a surge of righteous anger. "On the contrary," she replied, her voice carrying clearly through the surrounding conversations, "I've found that meaningful work provides energy rather than depleting it. And there's something remarkably invigorating about using one's mind and talents for purposes beyond personal aggrandizement." The barb hit its mark. Sterling's face flushed, and Charlotte's grip on his arm tightened visibly. "How fortunate," Sterling said through gritted teeth, "that you've found such suitable companions for your new endeavors." Elias stepped closer to Eleanor, his presence both protective and supportive. "Miss Whitmore's contributions to our work have been invaluable. Her intelligence and compassion have opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed." The contrast between the two men was striking. Where Sterling radiated entitled arrogance, Elias projected quiet strength. Where Sterling sought to diminish Eleanor, Elias celebrated her capabilities. The difference was not lost on the growing circle of observers. "Dr. Reed," Eleanor said, turning to face him with a smile that was both grateful and genuinely affectionate, "shall we proceed with your presentation? I believe our guests are eager to learn about the clinic." As they moved away from Sterling and Charlotte, Eleanor heard her former fiancé's voice. No longer carefully modulated, she always was too headstrong for her own good, but Eleanor no longer cared about Sterling's opinions. She'd found something far more valuable than a title or social position. She had found purpose, respect, and the beginning of something that felt remarkably like love. The presentation was a triumph. Elias spoke passionately about the medical needs of Boston's poorest residents, while Eleanor provided compelling statistics about the economic benefits of public health initiatives. Together, they painted a picture of a project that was both morally necessary and practically sound. When the evening ended, they had raised more than enough funds to establish the clinic, and Eleanor had received invitations to speak at similar events throughout New England. As Elias escorted her to Agatha's carriage, he paused on the club's front steps. "Eleanor," he said, using her given name for the first time, "there's something I need to tell you." Her heart began to race, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes, I'd been offered a position in Chicago," he said, his brown eyes serious in the gaslight, "to establish a network of clinics throughout the city. It's an extraordinary opportunity, but she prompted, though she thought she knew what he was about to say. "But I find myself reluctant to leave Boston. Or rather, reluctant to leave you." Eleanor felt her breath catch. "Elias, I know your history," he continued quickly. "I know about the scandal, about Sterling, about everything, and I want you to know that none of it matters to me. What matters is the woman you are now, the woman you've chosen to become." Before Eleanor could respond, he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "Eleanor Whitmore," he said, dropping to one knee on the club's marble steps, "would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because society expects it, not because it's advantageous, but because I love you, your mind, your heart, your courage, everything that makes you who you are." Eleanor looked down at this remarkable man who saw her not as a prize to be won or a possession to be acquired, but as a partner to be cherished. In the distance, she could see Sterling and Charlotte emerging from the club, their faces twisted with shock and something that looked remarkably like envy. But their reactions no longer mattered. What mattered was the choice before her, a choice made freely, based on love and mutual respect rather than duty and social expectation. What would her answer be? And how would this decision reshape not only her future, but her understanding of what it truly meant to be free? Eleanor's yes rang out clear and joyful in the crisp Boston evening, echoing off the marble steps of the Somerset Club like a declaration of independence. As Elias slipped the simple but elegant ring onto her finger, a single diamond surrounded by emeralds, that caught the gaslight like captured starfire, she felt the final chains of her old life fall away. The announcement of their engagement sent shockwaves through both Boston and New York society. Unlike her previous betrothal, which had been orchestrated by ambitious parents and social expectations, this engagement was Eleanor's choice entirely. The newspapers, ever hungry for scandal, initially approached the story with skepticism, but the genuine affection between the couple and their shared commitment to social reform gradually won over even the most cynical observers. "Dr. Reed is hardly a duke," sniffed Mrs. Cornelius Vanderbilt when the news reached New York, "but at least Eleanor has chosen a man of substance rather than scandal." The wedding preparations were a study in contrasts to Eleanor's previous experience. Instead of months of elaborate planning orchestrated by her mother, Eleanor and Agatha worked together to arrange a ceremony that reflected the couple's values and aspirations. The guest list included not only Boston's philanthropic elite, but also the teachers and students from Agatha's school, the immigrant families they had served, and colleagues from the medical community who had become their closest friends. Eleanor's wedding dress, created by a talented seamstress from the North End whose children attended the clinic, was a masterpiece of understated elegance. The ivory silk was simple in design but exquisite in execution, with delicate embroidery that told the story of her transformation, roses for new beginnings, oak leaves for strength, and small stars for the dreams she had dared to pursue. 3 weeks before the wedding, as Eleanor was reviewing the final arrangements in Agatha's parlor, Mary announced an unexpected visitor. "Miss Eleanor," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "the Duchess of Ashford is here to see you." Eleanor's hand stilled on the invitation she had been addressing. She had not spoken to Charlotte since the night of the gala, though she had heard through society gossip that Sterling's American investments had proven less profitable than expected, and that their marriage was already showing signs of strain. "Show her in, Mary," Eleanor said, rising to face whatever confrontation awaited. Charlotte entered the parlor, looking every inch the Duchess she had become, but Eleanor's trained eye noticed the subtle signs of unhappiness, the slight tremor in her hands, the carefully applied cosmetics that couldn't quite hide the shadows under her eyes, the brittle quality of her smile. "Eleanor," Charlotte said, her voice carrying a forced brightness, "you look well." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit. Would you care for tea?" "No, thank you. I won't be staying long." Charlotte perched on the edge of the offered chair, her posture rigid with tension. "I came to congratulate you on your engagement." Eleanor studied her sister's face, seeing past the Duchess's mask to the troubled young woman beneath. "That's very kind of you, Charlotte. How are you finding married life?" Charlotte's composure cracked slightly. It's everything I thought I wanted. The title, the estates, the position in society. But," Eleanor prompted, gently, "but Sterling is quotes Charlotte's voice broke. and for a moment she looked like the little sister Eleanor remembered, the one who had come to her room during thunderstorms and begged for stories. It's not the man I thought he was. He's cold, Eleanor. Calculating. He married me for the same reason he would have married you, for father's money. The only difference is that he found me more malleable. Eleanor felt a surge of sympathy for her sister, despite everything that had passed between them. Charlotte, if you're unhappy, there's nothing to be done, Charlotte said quickly, her duchess's mask sliding back into place. I made my choice just as you've made yours. I simply wanted to tell you that that I'm sorry, for my part in what happened. For the deception, for the betrayal. You deserved better from me. The apology hung in the air between them, and Eleanor felt the last of her anger toward her sister dissolve. Charlotte had gotten what she thought she wanted, only to discover that a title without love was its own kind of prison. I forgive you, Eleanor said simply. And I hope you find happiness, Charlotte. True happiness, not just the appearance of it. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears she was too well trained to shed. You always were the stronger one, she whispered. I see that now. After Charlotte left, Eleanor sat in the quiet parlor reflecting on the strange turns her life had taken. A year ago, she had been preparing to marry a duke and live a life of gilded captivity. Now she was about to marry a doctor and embark on a life of purpose and partnership. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, with the kind of perfect June weather that seemed to bless new beginnings. The ceremony took place in the chapel at Harvard University, a setting that reflected both the intellectual foundation of Eleanor and Elias's relationship and their commitment to education and social progress. As Eleanor walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she saw the faces of the people who had become her true family, Agatha beaming with pride, Dr. Sarah McKinney dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, the students from the school who had become her friends and inspiration. And at the altar, Elias waited with a smile that spoke of joy, respect, and genuine love. The ceremony was conducted by a progressive minister who spoke not of wifely obedience but of partnership, not of possession but of mutual support in the great work of making the world better. When Eleanor and Elias exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to be partners in both love and service, there wasn't a dry eye in the chapel. I promise to honor your mind as well as your heart, Elias said, his voice strong and clear, to support your dreams as you support mine, and to build with you a life of purpose and joy. I promise to stand beside you as an equal, Eleanor replied, her voice ringing with conviction, to share in your work and your dreams, and to face whatever challenges come with courage and love. As they kissed to seal their union, Eleanor felt a profound sense of rightness, as if all the painful experiences of the past year had been leading to this moment of perfect clarity and choice. The reception was held in Agatha's garden, transformed for the occasion into a bower of roses and jasmine. The guests mingled freely, Boston Brahmins conversing with immigrant families, society matrons learning about public health from young medical students, children from the North End playing with the offspring of Harvard professors. As the evening drew to a close, Eleanor and Elias prepared to depart for their honeymoon, not a grand tour of Europe, but a working trip to Chicago where they would establish the foundation for Elias's new position in Eleanor's expanded role in public health advocacy. Are you ready for this adventure, Mrs. Reed? Elias asked as their carriage pulled away from Agatha's house. Eleanor looked back at the warm lights of the home where she had discovered herself, then forward toward the unknown future that awaited them in Chicago. I've never been more ready for anything in my life, she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Behind them, the lights of Boston twinkled like stars, marking not an ending but a transformation. Eleanor Whitmore, the woman who had been destined for a life of beautiful captivity, was gone forever. In her place sat Eleanor Reed, a woman who had chosen her own path and found in that choice a freedom more precious than any title or fortune. But what awaited them in Chicago? And how would their partnership change not only their own lives, but the lives of those they were determined to serve? 2 years had passed since Eleanor and Elias arrived in Chicago, and the bustling metropolis had transformed them both in ways they could never have imagined. The city, still rebuilding from the Great Fire of 1871, pulsed with an energy that matched their own determination to create something meaningful from the ashes of the old world. Their home on Prairie Avenue was modest by the standards Eleanor had known in New York, but it overflowed with the warmth of genuine purpose. The 3-story brownstone had been carefully chosen for its proximity to both the immigrant neighborhoods they served and the established areas where they needed to cultivate support. Every room told the story of their mission. The parlor served double duty as a meeting room for the Chicago Women's Health Initiative, which Eleanor had founded 6 months after their arrival. The dining room frequently hosted dinners for an eclectic mix of guests, whole house reformers, immigrant community leaders, progressive physicians, and the occasional society matron whom Eleanor had successfully converted to their cause. The library, once Elias's study, had been transformed into a planning center where maps of Chicago's neighborhoods covered the walls, marked with colored pins indicating clinic locations, health statistics, and areas of greatest need. Eleanor's desk sat by the window overlooking the garden, where she could often be found in the early morning hours, writing reports, preparing presentations, or corresponding with reformers across the country who had heard of their work. On this particular October morning, Eleanor stood in the nursery she and Elias had recently prepared, her hand resting on the gentle curve of her growing belly. At 25, she possessed a radiance that had nothing to do with cosmetics or fashion and everything to do with a life lived with intention and love. The morning light streaming through the lace curtains illuminated her auburn hair, now worn in a practical style that could withstand long days in the field, and her green eyes sparkled with the same intelligence that had once been dismissed as unnecessary in a society wife. The nursery itself reflected their values: simple, beautiful furniture crafted by local artisans, books in multiple languages lining the shelves, and artwork created by children from their clinics decorating the walls. A rocking chair sat by the window, hand-carved by Elias during the long winter evenings when Eleanor had been too tired from her pregnancy to attend evening meetings. "The clinic reports are ready for your review, Mrs. Reed," said Margaret O'Brien, Eleanor's assistant and former student from Agatha's Boston school. Margaret had followed the Reeds to Chicago, drawn by the opportunity to be part of something revolutionary. At 23, she possessed the same fierce intelligence and determination that had first attracted Eleanor to the working women in Boston. But her Irish heritage and immigrant background gave her insights into the communities they served that Eleanor's privileged upbringing could never provide. Eleanor smiled, accepting the thick folder of documents. In the past 2 years, their network had grown to include 12 clinics throughout Chicago's immigrant neighborhoods, serving families who had never before had access to quality medical care. Each clinic was staffed by a combination of trained physicians, nurses, and community health workers recruited from the neighborhoods themselves. The statistics told a story of lives saved, children thriving, and communities strengthened, but Eleanor knew that behind every number was a human story of hope restored and dignity preserved. "The mortality rates in the Italian district have dropped by 40% since we opened the Halted Street Clinic," Margaret continued, her Irish accent still thick despite her years in America. "And the Polish Mothers Group has requested expansion of the nutrition education program. They want to start teaching other immigrant communities about American foods and how to maintain their traditional diets while ensuring proper nutrition for their children." "Excellent," Eleanor replied, settling into the rocking chair with a slight grimace as the baby shifted position. "The cross-cultural exchange has been one of our most successful innovations. What about the funding proposal for the new clinic in Pilsen?" "Mrs. Palmer has agreed to sponsor it entirely," Margaret said with obvious satisfaction. She said your presentation to the Chicago Women's Club was the most compelling argument for social reform she'd ever heard. She's also convinced 3 other society ladies to establish an endowment fund for ongoing operations. Eleanor laughed, remembering the nervous young woman who had once been terrified of speaking her mind in public. "If someone had told me 3 years ago that I would be addressing rooms full of people about public health policy, I would have thought them quite mad." The transformation had not been easy. Those first months in Chicago had been a constant struggle to prove herself in a city that knew nothing of her background, except the scandal that had driven her from New York. The immigrant communities had been suspicious of yet another wealthy lady who claimed to want to help, while the established medical community had questioned her qualifications and motivations. It had taken months of patient work, of showing up day after day in the most challenging neighborhoods, of listening more than speaking, before she had begun to earn the trust that was now the foundation of their success. The sound of the front door opening announced Elias's return from his morning rounds at the hospital. Eleanor heard his familiar step on the stairs, followed by his voice calling out, "How are my 2 favorite patients this morning?" He appeared in the nursery doorway, his medical bag in one hand and a bouquet of autumn flowers in the other. Despite the demands of his work, he now served as chief of staff at the new immigrant hospital they had helped establish. Elias had never lost the thoughtful gestures that had first captured Eleanor's heart. His dark hair was touched with premature silver at the temples, a testament to the long hours and heavy responsibilities he carried. But his brown eyes still lit up with the same warmth and intelligence that had drawn her to him in Boston. "Your patients are thriving, Dr. Reed," Eleanor said, rising carefully to accept his kiss and the flowers, though one of them was growing increasingly impatient to meet her parents. "Her?" Elias raised an eyebrow, his hands moving gently to Eleanor's belly where he could feel the strong, regular movements of their child. "Call it maternal intuition," Eleanor replied, covering his hands with her own. "I have a feeling she's going to be every bit as strong-willed as her mother, and twice as intelligent as her father." Heaven help us all, Elias said with mock terror, then grew serious as he felt a particularly vigorous kick. I have news from the hospital board meeting. They've approved our proposal for the teaching program. Eleanor's eyes lit up with excitement. The program would train immigrant women as community health workers, providing them with both employment opportunities and the skills to serve their own neighborhoods. It was exactly the kind of initiative that addressed multiple social problems simultaneously: employment, health disparities, and the cultural barriers that often prevented immigrant families from seeking medical care. That's wonderful. When do we begin recruiting students? Next month, if you're feeling up to supervising the curriculum development, Elias said, his concern for her health evident in his voice. As both her husband and her physician, he walked a careful line between supporting her ambitions and protecting her well-being. Elias Reed, I am pregnant, not invalid, Eleanor said firmly, though she appreciated his concern. This baby is going to be born into a world where her mother works alongside her father to make a difference. I intend to set that example from the very beginning. Their conversation was interrupted by Margaret's return, her face flushed with excitement and what appeared to be barely contained awe. Mrs. Reed, you have visitors. Very distinguished visitors. I've put them in the parlor with tea. Eleanor and Elias exchanged glances. They weren't expecting anyone, and Margaret's emphasis on distinguished suggested something unusual. Margaret had grown up in the tenements of Boston and was not icily impressed by social status, so her obvious excitement indicated visitors of genuine importance. In the parlor, they found an unexpected tableau that made Eleanor's heart leap with joy and surprise. Aunt Agatha sat in the place of honor, looking every inch the formidable Boston reformer she had become. Her silver hair was perfectly arranged. Her traveling dress was both practical and elegant, and her eyes sparkled with the same mischievous intelligence that had first encouraged Eleanor to question the limitations placed upon her. Beside her sat a woman Eleanor recognized from newspaper photographs but had never dared hope to meet: Jane Addams, the founder of Hull House and one of the most respected social reformers in America. Miss Addams was a woman of middle years with intelligent gray eyes and a manner that spoke of quiet authority earned through years of dedicated service to the poor and marginalized. Aunt Agatha, Eleanor exclaimed, moving as quickly as her condition allowed to embrace her mentor warmly. What a wonderful surprise. Why didn't you write that you were coming, my dear girl, Agatha said, holding Eleanor at arm's length to study her glowing face in obvious contentment. You look absolutely radiant. Marriage and meaningful work clearly agree with you. I wanted to surprise you, and I also wanted to see for myself what you and Elias have accomplished here. Miss Addams, Eleanor said, turning to their other guests with genuine awe. It's an honor to meet you. Your work at Hull House has been an inspiration to us all. We've modeled many of our programs on your innovations. Jane Addams rose, extending her hand with a warm smile. The honor is mine, Mrs. Reed. Your clinics have become the talk of reform circles throughout the Midwest. The integration of medical care with social services, the community-based approach to health education, the training of indigenous health workers, it's exactly the kind of comprehensive thinking we need to address urban poverty effectively. As they settled around the tea service, Margaret had hastily but expertly prepared. Eleanor noticed that both women were studying her and Elias with the careful attention of people who were evaluating them for something important. The conversation began with pleasantries, updates on mutual acquaintances in Boston, discussion of recent developments in the settlement house movement, and admiration for the comfortable but purposeful atmosphere of the Reed home. Your reputation has spread far beyond Chicago, Jane Addams said as she accepted a second cup of tea. The model you've developed here, combining medical care with social reform, training community members as health advocates, building bridges between immigrant communities and established institutions, it's revolutionary. We've simply tried to listen to what the communities actually need, Eleanor replied modestly. Too often, charitable work is designed to make the donors feel good rather than to address the real problems facing the recipients. Exactly, Jane Addams said, leaning forward with obvious enthusiasm. Which brings me to why I'm here. I've come to discuss a proposition that could expand your influence far beyond Chicago. She paused, glancing at Agatha, who nodded encouragingly. The federal government is considering a national public health initiative. The recent cholera outbreaks in New York and the typhoid epidemic in Pittsburgh have finally convinced Congress that urban health conditions are a national security issue, not just a local charity concern. Eleanor felt her pulse quicken with excitement, sensing that something momentous was about to be proposed. They need someone to lead a comprehensive study of urban health conditions across the country, Jane Addams continued. Someone who understands both the medical and social aspects of public health, who can work with immigrant communities and established institutions, who can document problems and develop practical solutions. The position would involve traveling to major cities across the country, Agatha added, documenting health disparities, studying successful programs, and developing recommendations for federal policy. It would be a 2-year appointment with the possibility of leading the implementation of whatever policies emerge from the study. Eleanor's mind raced with the implications. Such a position would provide an unprecedented opportunity to influence health policy on a national scale, to take the lessons they had learned in Chicago and apply them across the country. But it would also mean enormous responsibility, extensive travel, and separation from the work they had built here. The work would be demanding, Jane Addams acknowledged, but it would also provide an unprecedented opportunity to shape the future of public health in America. Your combination of practical experience, social connections, and genuine understanding of immigrant communities makes you uniquely qualified. Eleanor felt her heart racing with excitement, but also with uncertainty. It sounds extraordinary, but with the baby coming, the position wouldn't begin until next spring, Agatha interjected. Plenty of time for you to recover and adjust to motherhood, and the work could be structured to accommodate your family responsibilities. You would have a full staff, including assistants who could handle much of the travel when necessary. Elias reached for Eleanor's hand, his touch both supportive and questioning. What do you think? Eleanor looked around the room at Agatha, who had taught her that a woman could forge her own path and that limitations existed only in the mind. At Jane Addams, who had proven that social reform could be both practical and transformative, that one person with vision and determination could change the lives of thousands. At Elias, whose love had given her the courage to become who she was meant to be, and whose partnership had made their shared dreams possible. I think, she said slowly, her hand moving instinctively to her belly where their daughter was stirring, that this baby is going to have quite an adventurous childhood. The laughter that filled the room was warm and genuine, the sound of people who had found their purpose and were ready to pursue it together, no matter where it might lead. The rest of the afternoon was spent in detailed discussion of the proposed position. Jane Addams outlined the scope of the study, the resources that would be available, and the potential impact of the recommendations. Agatha shared news from Boston, where the work they had started continued to flourish under new leadership. Elias asked practical questions about logistics, funding, and the support structure that would be necessary for such an ambitious undertaking. As the sun began to set, painting the parlor in shades of gold and amber, Eleanor found herself thinking about the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. 3 years ago, she had been preparing to marry a duke and live a life of gilded captivity. Now she was being offered the opportunity to influence health policy for an entire nation. There's one more thing, Jane Addams said as they prepared to conclude their meeting. The position comes with a significant challenge. You would be the first woman to hold such a federal appointment. There will be resistance, criticism, and attempts to undermine your authority. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? Eleanor thought of the wedding day when she had stood before 300 guests and exposed Sterling's deception. She thought of the months of building trust in Chicago's immigrant neighborhoods, of the society matrons who had initially dismissed her as a naive do-gooder, of the medical establishment that had questioned her qualifications. Miss Addams, she said with quiet confidence, I've learned that the most worthwhile work is often the most difficult. If this position can help prevent even one child from dying of preventable disease, if it can help even one family access the medical care they need, then whatever criticism comes with it is a small price to pay. Jane Addams smiled with obvious satisfaction. I was hoping you would say that. After their guests departed, Eleanor and Elias sat on their front porch watching the sunset paint the Chicago sky in shades of gold and crimson. The evening air carried the sounds of the city children playing in nearby yards, the distant whistle of trains carrying new immigrants to their new lives, the multilingual conversations of neighbors gathering on their stoops to share the day's news. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had said I'd do that day? Eleanor asked, her hand resting on her belly where their daughter moved restlessly, as if already eager to join the world and begin making her own mark upon it. Elias considered the question seriously, as he always did when Eleanor posed one of her thoughtful hypotheticals. I think you would have found a way to be true to yourself eventually. You're too strong, too intelligent, too compassionate to have remained trapped forever. But I might never have met you, Eleanor pointed out, leaning against his shoulder and breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the antiseptic smell that always clung to his clothes after a day at the hospital. Then I would have been the one to lose, Elias replied, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. The world needs women like you, Eleanor. Women who refuse to accept limitations, who see problems and create solutions, who choose love over convenience and purpose over comfort. As if in response to her father's words, the baby kicked vigorously, making Eleanor laugh and place both hands on her belly. I think she agrees with you. She's going to change the world, Elias said with quiet conviction, just like her mother did. Eleanor leaned back against her husband's shoulder, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere in New York, Charlotte was probably preparing for another tedious social engagement. Trapped in the gilded cage Eleanor had escaped. The letters Eleanor occasionally received from mutual acquaintances painted a picture of a marriage that had quickly lost its luster, of a young woman who had gotten everything she thought she wanted, only to discover that a title without love was its own kind of prison. Somewhere in England, Sterling was likely calculating his next financial maneuver, his title providing prestige but not the happiness or fulfillment that came from meaningful work. The gossip that reached Eleanor through society connections suggested that his American investments had proven less profitable than expected, that his estates were still heavily mortgaged, and that his marriage to Charlotte was already showing signs of strain. But here in Chicago, in this modest house filled with love and purpose, Eleanor had found something far more valuable than any title or fortune. She had found herself, and in doing so, had discovered that true nobility came not from birth or marriage, but from the courage to serve others and the wisdom to choose one's own path. The future stretched before them, full of challenges and opportunities, of work to be done and lives to be touched. Their daughter would grow up in a world where women could be doctors and reformers, where love was chosen rather than arranged, where purpose mattered more than position. She would see her mother traveling across the country, documenting health conditions and developing policies that would save thousands of lives. She would learn that a woman's worth was measured not by her husband's status but by her own contributions to the world. As the evening stars brightened overhead, Eleanor Reed once, Eleanor Whitmore, the woman who had stopped her own wedding to expose the truth, smiled with deep contentment. She had bloomed exactly where she had chosen to plant herself, and the garden of her life was more beautiful than any she could have imagined. The work ahead would be challenging. There would be long separations as she traveled for the federal study, difficult negotiations with politicians and bureaucrats who questioned a woman's ability to understand complex policy issues, and the constant balancing act of motherhood and career that would define her generation of pioneering women. But tonight, surrounded by the evidence of what they had already accomplished, the reports documenting lives saved, the letters from grateful families, the photographs of healthy children who might not have survived without their clinics, Eleanor felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. She had discovered that love was not possession but partnership, not limitation but liberation. And she had found that the most beautiful life was not the one that looked perfect from the outside, but the one that felt meaningful from within. As Elias helped her to her feet and they prepared to go inside, Eleanor took one last look at the city that had become their home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve, new chances to make a difference. But tonight she was simply grateful for the journey that had brought her here, for the man who walked beside her, for the child who would soon join their mission, and for the knowledge that she had chosen well. The woman who had once been destined for a life of beautiful captivity had instead created a life of beautiful purpose, and the best was yet to come. Eleanor's story reminds us that sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is say no to the life others have planned for us and yes to the life we choose for ourselves. Her journey from a gilded cage to meaningful freedom shows us that true happiness comes not from meeting others' expectations, but from having the courage to follow our own hearts and serve something greater than ourselves. What moments in your own life have required the courage to choose authenticity over approval? Have you ever had to walk away from something that looked perfect on the surface to find something truly meaningful underneath? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear about the times you've chosen your own path, even when it seemed impossible. And if Eleanor's story inspired you, please subscribe for more tales of courage, transformation, and the power of choosing love over convenience. Sometimes the most beautiful endings come from the bravest beginnings.